Whoa, 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 whoa. Stop right there. Stop right there. You can't do that. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night. Welcome back to Positive LMY. My name is Adriana Nikia and I am the founder. So on this channel, we focus on creating and maintaining a positive life, a positive mind, and a positive you. Today we're going to talk about standards and boundaries. Do you have any? If that's something you're interested in, let's go. Let's go. Before we begin, we're going to discuss what standards and boundaries are. Okay? Standards are within you. Standards are what makes you comfortable, and it's all about you. Boundaries are put in place to protect your standards. Boundaries let others know how we want to be treated. It lets them know our limits, the expectations, and what we will and will not tolerate. If you have poor boundaries, you may be compromising what you truly feel. So, for example, if you're in a relationship and you have set in place a boundary and your significant other pays no attention to it and just completely ignores it and you're okay with it, that's an example of having poor boundaries. You also have poor boundaries if you disrespect someone else's values, beliefs, and opinions. It's theirs to have. If you feel like your values, your opinions, and your beliefs rank higher than anyone else's, you have poor boundaries. There is a simple formula to all of this. Part 1 is to know your value. Part 2 is to set your standard within yourself. Part 3 is to communicate your boundaries. And we're about to talk about that in a second. And part 4, if someone violates your boundaries, there has to be a consequence. So, let's go over an example. Know your value. I deserve honesty. Set your standard. I do not associate with liars. Establish a boundary. If you lie to me, I will stop talking to you the first time. There needs to be a time limit. So if you say, if you lie to me, I will stop talking to you. Well, how many times do I get? Do I get to lie to you once or twice? Or, what? What are the rules? So your boundary, if you lie to me, I will stop talking to you the first time. And then the last one is the consequence. So I know what's going to happen if you lie. So if you lie, that's it. I'm done talking to you. Before we can start establishing boundaries, we need to be certain of what our standards are. And since today we're only focusing on relationships, I want you to get a sheet of paper and I want you to make columns. Column A should be self, right? You have a relationship with yourself. Then column B, maybe if you're in a relationship, what do you expect? What are your standards in relationships? If you're a parent, how are you as a parent? What are your parenting standards? What are your standards with your coworkers? So any relationship you have, there needs to be a column. And you need to fill that bad boy up with standards. And you have to do this before you can start creating your boundaries. And this is all done for your mental health and your mental well-being and your comfort. It's up to you to implement it. It's up to you to search within yourself and figure out what makes you happy, what makes you comfortable, what gives you joy. I don't want you to think about anyone else but yourself when you're making these lists. It is your job to create your own standards and create your own boundaries. Do not give anyone else permission or authority over your life to do this for you. There are 5 steps to creating boundaries. Step number 1 is to communicate. It's important to be as open and transparent and honest as possible. You want to tell your partner or your family member, hey, this is my standard. This is my boundary. For example, if your love language, and we'll talk about love languages a little bit more in my next video, but if your love language is physical touch, that's your standard. You need physical touch and affection. But your boundary is, I want physical touch as in a hug, but I'm not ready to be intimate yet. So the hug, that's my boundary. I'm not going past a hug. It's important to communicate that with your partner as early as possible. Number 2, never assume. Assuming is just a gateway to misunderstandings and verbal altercations. So let's use my example with number 1. You need hugs. Let's say you're in a relationship and the person that you're in is not normally affectionate. Affection doesn't come to them naturally. They don't know you need hugs because you've never said, hey, I need hugs. Number 3, follow through with your boundaries. So if I have a boundary, or if you have a boundary of only hugging, that's it. That's my boundary. That's where the affection and everything else stop. But as soon as my partner says, no, but you know, this and that, get in your ear, and you're like, okay, all right. And then you're intimate. What was the point of setting the boundary? What was the point? If you set boundaries and you violate your own boundaries, then what's the point in setting them? What's the point if you break your own boundaries? If you violate your own boundaries, why would anybody else adhere to your boundaries? Why would anybody else follow your rules when you don't follow your own rules? Think about that. So not only do you have the expectation of everyone else adhering and following what your boundaries are, you have to do it as well. And you can't flip-flop. Your boundary is your boundary. Your standard is your standard. That's it. You can't have a standard on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then a different standard on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. You can't do it. It has to be cement. It has to be concrete. Number 4, be accountable. And by accountable, I mean there should be a consequence if a boundary is broken. There should be. So if you are with someone and you're weak enough to break your boundary around that person, you should leave that person alone. Number 1, you don't respect yourself to stick to your own standards and your own boundaries. But number 2, they don't respect you either. If you've done number 1 properly, you communicated with them properly, hey, this is my boundary, and they still try to get you to violate your own boundary, what you did, they don't respect you. They don't. And obviously, you don't all the way respect yourself yet. Number 5, adapt your standards and boundaries to who you are now. We evolve as people. We evolve. And our standards and boundaries evolve with us. We change as people. So our standards and boundaries will change as well. And when you adapt your standards and boundaries to who you are now, the cycle continues. The cycle begins again. Because you have to communicate those new standards and boundaries to the people around you. Now that we've worked our formula and established standards for ourselves, it's time to implement those boundaries. This may look different compared to who you are talking to. So your boundaries for your romantic relationship won't necessarily be the same boundaries for, let's say, with your parents or your family members. So that's why I said when we were creating standards to have a column for each. Not having standards and boundaries in a relationship is basically an invitation to creating a very toxic situation. If you need help, if you need guidance, search within yourself before asking other people to help you. Remember, Know your value. That's your value. That's you. That's self. Set your standard. That's what makes you comfortable. Then implement your boundary and establish consequences. That's all done within yourself. But if you know your value and if you set your standard and you're having trouble with boundaries, just comment down below. I can give some guidance. I can give some help. And remember, when you are establishing boundaries, you have to stick with them as well. You can't just expect everyone around you to stick with them. Love you. If I helped you, please comment down below. And then don't forget to like and subscribe